from Sonia.
I'll get back to Sonia.
How's her daughter Rita?
A regular Lolita.
How's your cousin Manny?
Signed up with Big Tanny.
How's your nephew Seymour?
Seymour joined the Peace Corps.
He's nice too. He's nice too. Sarah John.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I've edited these down a little bit. We're just going to hear little snippets of these songs. But so what's so Jewish about that? There are no synagogues in it, no bagel. He didn't mention the Hadassah. And yet it's unmistakably Jewish. What is it? One is what we were talking about a minute ago, the structure of the language. How's about you to family is not something that a native-speaking English person of the last persuasion might say. They'd say, how is your family? Not, how's about you to family? How's your sister Emily? That's also a very funny rhyme. But also some of the rhymes are signaling the language, right? Rhyming on, how's your daughter Ida? She's a freedom rider. Now in English, you would rhyme apple cider with freedom rider. So there are ways that he's signaling. Again, it's not the accent of our parents or our grandparents, but there's certain way that it's signaling to us that this is Jews talking. I'm going to keep going. We'll talk about it at the end. But he's not talking the way I'm speaking to you now. He's talking more the way that I talked when I was growing up, you know. And it's funny because now I'm in New York, I find myself talking like that a little bit more, especially if I'm in the deli, you know, or in the Yankee Stadium, and you find it coming out and you don't know which is the real one is you. It's called code switching. And nobody had ever heard Jews code switch like this in public before. So this is a very important moment that this is happening. There are other things that signal that this is Jewish, right? Listen to the names. It's Esther, Shirley, Ida, Nathan, Sidney, Manning, Seymour, Bernie, Mo, I. These are not the names you were hearing on the Beaver, right? And what are these people doing? They're doing what Jews were doing, right? They were attorneys, showbiz talent agents. They're joining the Peace Corps. They're freedom riders in the Civil Rights Movement, right? This is what Jews were doing. This was Jews talking to Jews. So why was this so, I would argue, monumentally important in this moment? Why did this change the world, not just for Jews, but for other ethnic groups? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. So, Alan Sherman is born November 30th, 1924 in Chicago. His parents assimilated. They surrendered themselves to being totally American. He's born Aaron Copeland. His mother makes his father change the spelling of his name because people were mispronouncing it Kaplan. Too Jewish, right? The mother was to put it mildly, a wildly emotional person. Today we would probably, she would probably be diagnosed schizophrenic. The father leaves when he's 8 years old. The mother marries again several times. In the middle of all this chaos in his life in Chicago, he turns to his maternal grandparents, who were Yiddish-speaking, Esther and Leon Sherman, and spends a lot of time in their Jewish neighborhood. And so this push-pull we talked about a minute ago, assimilation, ethnic identity, he has it right there in his family with his parents and his grandparents. So just as an interesting side note, there's something else going on in Chicago at this time. Chicago is in the national lead, the lead of nationwide, of stamping out vaudeville. Why were they trying to stamp out vaudeville? On the one hand, vaudeville is where all the great Jewish comics came from. The Marx Brothers, they all came out of vaudeville. On the other hand, vaudeville was filled with really negative Jewish stereotypes. Guys in fake beards and hooked noses and thick accents. It was called Jew face. Vaudeville was actually started by non-Jewish people to make fun of Jews, and then the Jews kind of took it over, but continued what they called Jew face. All these stereotypes of Jews being cheap. One of the big early hits was a guy on his deathbed, calls his son over and sings the song, the immortal song, Cohen owes me $97. So two groups formed in Chicago at that time. One, lost to time, was the Anti-Stage Ridicule Committee, and the other, which lasted a little longer, was the brand new Anti-Defamation League. And they were trying to, so this tradition of Jewish songs went away because the Jews were embarrassed about it. So anyway, Alan Sherman is moving back and forth from Chicago to Los Angeles. His mother gets married again. He drops him off with the grandparents, and he spends a year living with this Yiddish-speaking couple in this very Jewish neighborhood in Chicago. Goes to the University of Illinois, writes his first song parodies there. The boogie, it's the end of the war, the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B becomes the conscientious objector of Company Z. He was a huge hit on campus. He wrote the entire musical in the middle of World War II. He did a parody of Oklahoma, Yokohama, where the planes come sweeping through the wind, Yokohama. And everything's up to date in Berchtesgaden, which Berchtesgaden is a German city, which, that's a kind of joke that 45 to 55, they called it the golden decade. Jews were deepening their identity as Americans, but again, sublimating their Jewish identities. Jewishness kind of goes underground. This is reflected in Broadway, interestingly, is a great place to notice this. If you think about it, Jews write all the Broadway musicals in this period. If you think, Frank Lesser is Jewish, Jerome to fit in, the outsiders struggling to make their way in the world, but through other cultures. Porgy and Bess, they're telling it through African Americans, Oklahoma, Guys and Dolls, South Pacific, West Side Story, Gypsy, all telling the Jewish story, but through other cultures, right? West Side Story, for example, was originally written as East Side Story. It was about the Jews and the Irish struggling for turf on the Lower East Side, and the producer said, too Jewish. And so it became West Side Story. Occasionally, if you listen, bits seep through. I've always loved when you watch Guys and Dolls, the Frank Sinatra character, Nathan Detroit, sings, what is it? All right already, I'm such a no-good nigga. All right already, so new, so sue me, sue. What is this, Nathan Detroit do, right? Because, these are the Jews seeping, their language is starting to seep through. There's a great documentary about this, by the way, called Broadway Musicals: A Jewish Legacy, if you're interested in exploring this further. But a lot of the melodies from those musicals came from Jewish melodies. So it ain't necessarily so. Where did they get that? Or right? So anyway, so back down to Lerman. So he becomes a TV producer. He produces. Anybody remember the show I've Got a Secret?
Oh, yeah.
Right, it was actually a rip-off of What's My Line. But yeah, so he was the executive producer of that. And became this big TV producer, and is around a lot of famous people. And this is when, to foreshadow what happens at the end of the story, his really bad behavior starts. He's drinking a lot, he's smoking a lot, he becomes very overweight, very sexually promiscuous, living not the best life, but very prominent. So prominent that in 1957, at the Vernon Hills Country Club in Eastchester, he's asked to perform. This is a country club where Jews flocked to, but the rule of the club was kind of don't act too Jewish, right? Act Gentile, fit in. So there's a celebrity golf tournament, and it's really huge. Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Perry Como, Sid Caesar are there. That rule, don't be too Jewish, Sherman breaks it totally. He does his takeoff on Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, and he sang, no tape of this exists, but he sang, I'm wild again, beguiled again, whimpering, simpering, child again, vermischt, verkackt and verblunget. Can't sleep a wink, I lay and think, she's wearing my mink and she's out with think, vermischt, verkackt and verblunget. So, and this starts him on this streak of writing parodies of 20 parodies of Broadway musicals. He calls them his golden moments from Broadway. And he's performing these at parties. They were never released. He could never get the rights to it, but bootleg tapes surfaced over the years. And now those are available, and we have them. The best of them, I'm going to play you a little bit of it. He did an entire parody of My Fair Lady, the entire musical. Remember what we were saying about Jews in Broadway? He tackles that head on in the introduction to one of the musicals. So let's play.
What you're about to hear is entitled Golden Moments from Broadway. About 6 years ago, I said to myself, what would have happened? How would it have been if all of the great Broadway hits of great Broadway shows had been written by Jewish people? Which they were.
We heard Lewis Black talk about comedy as being creating tension and then pulling the string or releasing it yesterday, which is exactly what he did there, if you notice. What if they had all been written by Jewish people? Which they were. So anyway, let's listen to the intro. He'll explain what's going to happen in his version of for those who remember, I'm sure most of you remember, My Fair Lady was Professor Higgins is going to teach Liza Doolittle how to speak perfectly and fit into society. So here's Alan Sherman's take on it, number 3.
And so, I wrote My Fair Lady to my everlasting credit. And the way I wrote the story, it starts on 2nd Avenue in New York, outside of the National Theater, which is a Jewish vaudeville theater. And these two men come out of the theater, the performance is over, and they're standing there comparing notes on the performance, and they notice that nearby is a girl, and she is selling flowers. She's a flower girl with a little basket of flowers. And she's saying the flowers, the names of the flowers, perfectly. She's saying forsythia, chrysanthemum, begonia. And she's saying it so good that nobody can understand her, and she's not selling any flowers. So this one fella, he takes pity on her, and he says to the other fella, he says, "You know what's it over there?" So he says, "She's got a speech impediment." So he says, "Well, what can you do about it?" He says, "I'll tell you something. I can take that girl under my wing. And 6 months from today, that girl would be elected president of Hadassah."
So as I said, he writes a parody of the entire musical. I'm going to play just a couple of snippets to give you a flavor of it. The first of these is Wouldn't It Be Loverly? And with a little bit of luck, he takes on those 2 songs on number 4.
All you need is a coat with minks, cocktail watches and cocktail links, and got our Jewish dinks and that'd be lovely. All you need is a matzo ball, lots of carpet, wall-to-wall, a sleeping maid, that's all, and it'd be lovely. You'll start learning to play canasta like the girls all do. And by next December, you'll wind up in the cotton blue.
So obviously there he's playing off of
A piece of rye bread isn't very tasty. A slice of onion isn't such a treat. A slab of cream cheese tastes a little pasty, but with a little bit of rust. Something very good too.
So anyway, this is funny, right? So, but also he's playing off of, not only Jewish stereotypes, but things that Jewish people did. Jewish women played canasta. Fountain Blue is where Jews love to go to in the winter. He's also playing off in this next clip the fact that at this time, even though Jews are assimilating into society, they're still living in pretty restricted, pretty segregated neighborhoods. There are a lot of places that are still very restricted that won't allow Jews to buy land there. we didn't should talk over and know anything about it. So he plays off of this idea of the restricted neighborhoods that Jews are not allowed to buy land.
We have often walked West End Avenue, and you'll find us on a parkway known as Marshall Loop, living gaily there, like Israeli there. Oh, it's grand on the streets where we live. We've got Scarsdale men, we've got Great Neck men, and just lately we've been sneaking into Darien.
Anyway, so we will go on with that.
New noses there, friends of Moses there, near the Goy, on the streets where they live.
Sorry, I stepped on his line. Strange new noses there, friends of Moses. That's the line. He's playing with the stereotypes, but he's also playing with the putting forward of the Jewish identity. Obviously, he's still working in that very thick Jewish accent, not what we were talking about earlier, that hasn't gotten there yet. He did a lot of these musicals. South Pacific became South Passaic. When Music Man was released, he wrote a song, 76 trombones became 76 Salcones. And same thing, this time he tried to get Meredith Wilson to give him the rights to it. He actually got into see Meredith Wilson and played the song for him. He said, "You're crazy, get out of my house." So we're not going to So this is funny for us, but it's still not ready for prime time. It's still too Jewish. This is, again, a moment when Jews are going underground, they're trying to assimilate, they're changing their names. A lot of Jews change their name in this period. Changing their noses, as he referred to a second ago. When we were kids, somebody getting a nose job was not unheard of for Jews trying to pass, right? The heavily accented comics you may be thinking about in this moment, Myron Cohen, Jackie Mason, Mickey Katz, they were novelties. They were not huge hits. They were hits among the Jews. You know, the successful Jewish comics in the Catskills, they were Jewish in the Catskills, and they told the punchline of jokes in Yiddish often, but in public they were not so Jewish, right? So you think of Shelley Berman, Nicholson May, Mort Saul, Lenny Bruce, Tom Lehrer. They're presenting a kind of intellectual Jewishness, distancing themselves from that heavier Jewish accent in those. They're not making jokes about the Fontainebleau and locks, right? So, but this is a key moment as we come through the 50s, because in 1944, a poll found that a quarter of Americans viewed Jews as a threat to the country. Now think about that for a second. Toward the end of the war, a quarter of Americans thought Jews were a threat to the country. By 1962, that same poll found that only 1% thought so. Obviously, we did something right. But this change in public perception meant that this is a moment when the Jewish song tradition that had disappeared might be able to come back in some form if somebody could find that formula. So in summer of '61, Alan moves to Los Angeles and meets Harpo Marx, which is a big turning point because Harpo falls in love with Alan Sherman and introduces him to all the great comics. It has a big party where with Jack Benny and George Burns and Milton Berle and the other Marx brothers all show up. And these are guys who grew up with the original Jewish songs, right? Some of you may remember like Yidel Mitten Fiddle and I'm a Yiddish Cowboy, you know, the songs from Blood, but they knew those. And so they understood what Alan Sherman was doing, they loved it, and it was a huge hit with these comics. And so they started making contacts for him. One of the contacts they made for him was a party for Los Angeles record executives, and they got him to perform at that party. And he did a song that is way too filthy for the average Jewish center at 12:30 in the afternoon. But the president of Warner Brothers Records, a guy named Mike Maitland, was infatuated with Sherman and signed him to a contract. And again, this is a moment when the country has just elected its first Catholic president. The idea, and which was amazing at the time, the idea that white people could be ethnic, could be something other than WASP, was still startling at that moment. Jews who were too Jewish still were not making it big. Does anybody know the 2,000-year-old man, Mel Brooks? He does that in a very thick Jewish accent. Panned at the time, not successful at all when it came out. But at this moment, there is still a lot of Jewish energy in the culture. Leonard Bernstein, Harry Belafonte recorded Hava Nagila. You remember the movie The Apartment with Jack Lemmon? What does that turn on? His neighbor is this Jewish guy who convinces Jack Lemmon to be a mensch, right? So there's Jewishness around. Philip Roth writes Goodbye Columbus at this moment, 1959. As I said, so Bellows writing about it. But no one has yet found the formula to bring comedy, Jewish comedy, to the front. And then this comes out. So My Son the Folk Singer was released in 1961. In 1962, sorry. In 1961, Congress is revisiting the copyright laws to protect publishers from exactly the kind of thing that Alan Sherman is trying to do. They're on the warpath, right? So somebody suggests, why don't you parody the folk craze? For two reasons. One, folk music had not yet become Bob Dylan and singer-songwriters. It was still all singing traditional ballads. So A, it was all very sincere and right for parody, but also, more importantly, all those songs are in the public domain, so he doesn't have to get the rights to them. So where does he go? 3 of the songs on this album come from 2 Harry Belafonte albums. That's how much homework he did. Jump Down, Spin Around, Waterboy, and Matilda, his song Matilda. He took those 3 songs. 3 of the others were also in the public domain. Frere Jacques, which we heard Sarah Jockman. Greensleeves and Streets of Laredo, all public domain songs. So that's how that happens, right? He records it on August 6, 1962, does it all in one take. He believed that if you do it twice, you're not going to get a laugh the second time. So every song on it is done in one take. It shows occasionally. Billboard predicts that the sales will be among New Yorkers, Los Angelinos, and other big cityites, read Jews, right? Variety says the customers will be along the Miami Catskills axis. Jews, right? It's released in October 62 and became the fastest selling album in history. Now, I didn't say the fastest selling comedy album, the fastest selling album in history. This in a world where Elvis exists, okay? So it's released in October, sells 400,000 copies by the end of the month. By December, it has sold 1 million. Now, to give you some perspective, these are Beatles numbers. I mean, the Beatles, what we consider to be the first Beatle album in America, Meet the Beatles, which, as you know, is the second album, but they're considered to be the first Beatle album. Meet the Beatles took a year to sell 4 million records. He sold 1 million in 3 months. He does Sarah Jockman on Ed Sullivan and becomes an enormous hit. Okay, how big? President Kennedy is seen walking through the lobby of the Carlisle Hotel singing Sarah Jockman. That's when you know you're all right. What you heard was him doing it with a TV actress named Christine Nelson. Every woman singer wanted in on the act. He does it with Edie Gourmet, he does it with Jane Meadows, Edie Adams, Rosemary Clooney. Every big singer of the time wants to do that. This is just a few years, remember, after Leonard Bernstein was told he has to change his name to Burns because it's too Jewish, right? So how does Alan Sherman handle that controversy and all the Jews changing their names? Well, the Irish song Dear Old Donegal was a big hit for Bing Crosby. And it went, Meet Bradigan, Flanagan, Milligan, Gilligan, Duffy, McCuffy, Malachi, Mahone, Rafferty, Lafferty, Donnelly, Connolly, Dooley, O'Gooley, Muldowney, Malone, right? This was a big hit for Bing Crosby. Here's what Alan Sherman does that, number 6.
Shake hands with your Uncle Max, my boy, and here is your sister Shirley, and here is your cousin Isabel, that's Irving's oldest girl. The Tishman twins, Gerald and Jerome. We all came out to greet you and to wish you welcome home. Meet Merowitz, Handelman, Chandlerman, Sperber and Gerber and Steiner and Stone. Moskowitz, Lubowitz, Ahrens and Barents, Feynman and Friedman and Cohn. Swallowitz, Teitelbaum, Mandelbaum, Levinsky, Levine and Levi. Brumberger, Schlumberger, Minkus and Pinkus and Stein with an E-I and Stein with a Y.
I mean, I'm a 6-year-old kid in the Bronx, and I'm listening to this. Smolowitz, Wallowitz, Teitelbaum, Mandelbaum, Levin, Levinsky, Levine, and Levi. Brumberger, Schumberger, Minkus and Pinkus, and Stein with an E-I and Stein with a Y. The profound influence this has on a kid in the Bronx who has never seen himself reflected in the culture, certainly not in the #1 album in America, certainly not in this way. It was amazing. It was a great comic rebuttal to the idea of having to change your name, having to change your nose, having to fit in. There are a lot of, we can't go through too much of the album, but there are so many great little Jewish in-jokes in there that, as we were talking about before, signal the Jewishness of this without resorting to the heavy accent of our grandparents, you know. On the Ballad of Harry Lewis, he works for Irving Roth Draperies, and he dies while cutting velvet. My father was a clothing cutter, and that's, for some reason, that's what do you do, Dad? I cut velvet. You know, that's the term for being in the schmata business. He does a play on the term the grapes of wrath. Harry Lewis perished in the service of his Lord. He was trampling in the warehouse where the drapes of wrath are stored. Perhaps the worst rhyme or the best rhyme on the album, I'm not sure. I'm going to play one other cut from there. We talked a minute ago about Matilda, who was the Harry Belafonte. Matilda, she took the money and ran Venezuela. Here's what Ellen Sherman did with that in this
My Zelda, my Zelda, my Zelda, she took the money and ran with the tailor. My Zelda, she took the money and ran with the tailor. My Zelda, she found her big romance when I broke the zipper in my pants. My Zelda, she took the money and ran with the tailor. Sing along with Moist now. Oh, why did she go and fall in love? I haven't seen her since Tisha. My Zelda, she took the money and ran with the tailor. Everybody! Took the money and ran with the tailor.
So you know this song. You heard this already? You heard this. So, I'm so glad you caught Sing Along with Moish now. There was a big TV show at the time, Sing Along with Mitch. And just that little twist of Sing Along with Moish, right? For a Jewish kid in New York, that was hysterical. Right? Tisha B'Av is a Jewish holiday that nobody would know. And he didn't take any time to explain it. This was Jews talking to Jews. Unabashedly and unashamedly, which had not happened. Certainly not on the #1 record in America. Certainly not on television. Certainly not on Leave It to Beaver and My Father's Knows Best and the Donna Reed show. You weren't hearing it, you weren't seeing it, but now you were. And that was what was so profoundly changing at the time, as the country is changing as well. The fine balancing act of being a Jew, trying to be an American as well, is tipping in a different direction, away from the idea of the melting pot, where we all come together as one big sameness, into what sociologists call the salad bowl. We all come together to become one thing, but we retain, you cucumbers and you tomatoes and us lettuces, we retain our own identity as we come into the salad bowl, not the melting pot. And why was this popular not just with Jews I think because it's funny, but I think also because this question of retaining your ethnic identity had become more bubbling up in the culture, not just with Jews. Jews were not the only ones whose families spoke with off-kilter English, who had big unruly families, who were crazy for bargain merchandise, whose parents were struggling to make a buck. I think Italian and Irish and black families could relate to this because his biographer, who I'll talk about in a minute, says the ethnic revival of the 60s and 70s was underway. Some group had to lead the charge, and this album said Jews would take the job. I think he may be going a little too far there, but certainly this has resonance beyond the Jewish community in a lot of different ways. He releases 2 more albums within a year, My Son the Celebrity and My Son the Nut. They all go to #1. At this point in time, who has 3 consecutive #1 albums? Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Alan Sherman.
Oh, wow.
That's how big this is at the time, right? He makes 10 appearances on The Tonight Show. He does 30 live concerts that year. He performed at the National Press Club's inaugural ball. Chief Justice Warren was in attendance, Peter Salinger, Lyndon Johnson, a lot of famous not-Jewish people. And he said, they told me I should tone down the Jewish stuff because the fellows said it would be a good idea if I kept in mind that this was a mixed group and that the composition of the audience would be of approximately 10% Jewish. I'm actually delighted to hear that. For example, Chief Justice Warren, I didn't know you were any part Jewish at all. He did meet President Kennedy on March 3rd of that year, of '63. He said, I like your album very much. In summer of '63, finally, Hello Mother, Hello Father comes out. Sold 100,000 copies in 4 days. Once again, not explicitly Jewish, but the Jewish speech patterns. Now, I don't want this shit scare you. It's something that my grandmother would say, my father would say, my grandmother would speak English. But Jews were also at the epicenter of this exploding summer camp market, so it kind of had a Jewish resonance for that reason as well. He continues to explore what it is to be Jewish in America in the 60s on these other 2 albums. And we'll play one more clip for you. Suburbanization became very huge after World War II as the soldiers were returning for the war, and Jews suburbanized more than any other group. Levittown was opened in 1947, and Jews flocked there, and that became the template for suburbanization across the country. That was the first planned suburban community. And so, Levittown kind of put Jews at the center of this new national life, and he starts playing with that on this song, number 8.
Here's to the crabgrass, here's to the mortgage, in fact, here's to suburbia.
Lay down your briefcase far from the rat race where nothing can disturb ya.
Uncomplicated, it's what we waited for so long in this city. Come, let us go there, live like Thoreau there, a life of sweet simplicity.
Did you set the thermostat?
No, I don't know where it's at.
Tuesday become scouts meet again.
Walk the dog and cut the grass.
Take the kids to dancing class.
Jim's little league got beat again.
Can't keep a maid here no matter what they're paying here.
The place has bad publicity.
Why did we move here?
Don't you remember to live in sweet simplicity?
So again, he's very relevant and he's very popular. So what happens? 2 things. One, he's living a life of terrible excess. He's burning the candle at both ends. He's working very hard. He is very sick, very overweight. But also what happens is the 60s happen. One, a new Jewish comedy starts to arise. Woody Allen is a much more sophisticated, much more sexy, much more urbane kind of humor. And as the 60s sexual revolution gains steam, his sexual material we haven't heard a lot of, but it's all very prim and proper, and it becomes cliche, it becomes childish, it becomes antique. In 1964, Fiddler on the Roof opens on Broadway. Finally, the Jews, having run out of cultures to talk about, finally write about Jews. And it's a big hit, and people realize, oh my God, you actually can tell a story about Jews, and people will come. Funny Girl opens that same year. Am I saying that without Alan Sherman, there would be no Fiddler? I'm not saying that. He goes back and forth for a while, doing some Jewish material, some not Jewish material. It's smart, the rhymes are still great, but it's not relevant anymore. It's not important anymore. The world is exploding. He starts writing songs coming down on the side of the establishment. The guy who wrote songs from the outsider looking in is suddenly writing songs about fad diets and TV commercials. He's very mainstream protected. He writes songs ridiculing off-Broadway, making fun of the sexual revolution, disapproving of Peyton Place. Pop Goes the Weasel becomes Pop Hates the Beatles, right? Crazy Downtown, parents worried about their children out there frugging. Oh, my kids are no more frugging, you know? It's so out of touch with what's going on in society at this moment. Bloody Sunday happens in Selma. The civil rights movement is exploding, the sexual revolution, Vietnam. And he's writing songs about fad diets and TV commercials, and suddenly, very quickly, it feels very dated. In December 1965, Dusty Springfield went to go play in South Africa, and they told her you can only play for segregated audience, you may not play for mixed race audiences, and she refuses, and she's deported. And just by coincidence, Alan Sherman the next month is going to South Africa and vows, I will not pull a Dusty Springfield. So nothing could make him more aligned with the generation that the 60s is trying to overturn. He's very sexually promiscuous, but writing these very prim and proper songs making fun of sexual promiscuity, very passive on racial justice. And with all this going on, America's ready for an edgier humor. Richard Pryor, Joan Rivers, I mean, these are different kinds of comics coming up. And then, of course, you move into the 70s, George Carlin and the 7 Words You Can Never Say on Television changes everything. He blazes the way for a new kind of humor, and Alan Sherman's albums go out of print. And on November 20th, 1973, just a week shy of his 59th birthday, Alan passed away from a heart attack. So, interestingly, 30 years later, the same fight happens. Seinfeld tries to get a show on NBC, and they don't resist him because too Jewish. They don't think it'll play in Middle America. The ratings obviously prove them wrong, and suddenly Curb Your Enthusiasm, which very clearly Jewish, and Daily Show, very clearly Jewish. And in this moment, there is a re-examination of Alan Sherman and his records. He went from being irrelevant to being seen as the groundbreaker that we've talked about today. If Jews have developed an at-homeness in America, then Alan Sherman certainly seems to have led the way. So just to wrap up, I talked a little bit about what this meant to me as a kid. I loved reading. Every Jewish comic did an autobiography where they extolled the virtues of their life in the Bronx. Alan King and Wally Cox and Sam Levinson, and I loved those books. Some of you may remember The Education of Hyman Kaplan, the Neil Ralston book, where he talks about a Jewish immigrant in America trying to learn English. And I loved all of this, but this was leading me in a new direction. My father used to tell jokes in the old Jewish style, right? He'd say, my father would say, so Schwartz falls out a window, lands on the sidewalk. Guy comes up and says, Schwartz, what happened? He says, I don't know, I just got here. humor. Alan Sherman taught me how I could be Jewish and how I could be funny in America. And I'll always be grateful for that. So I'm just going to end, and we'll go to some questions, but I'm going to end with the most important advice that Alan Sherman has ever given the Jewish people. Do not make a stingy sandwich. Pile the cold cuts high. Customers should see salami coming from your eye. Thank you very much. Just before we go to questions, I always like to quote my sources. There's a terrific biography I was mentioning of Alan Sherman by a guy named Mark Cohen. It's called, my favorite title thought is called Overweight Sensation. And also he has an autobiography that my friend Ali lent to me that was also very helpful. It's called A Gift of Laughter. So I lean heavily on those and 60 years listening to these songs.
Phil, thanks so much. That was just great. Why didn't you play Hello Mata, Hello Fata?
We played it on the way in as we were walking in. As I said, that came later, and I think that was less part of, for me, what was really groundbreaking about those first two albums. But we played it as people were walking in.
I have a question about royalties. You mentioned you used some of those songs at the beginning, which, had to pay royalties. Did he ever end up paying royalties? Or
Yes, there are two things we're talking about. It's not just paying the royalties, but it's first getting the rights. So if you get the rights, then yes, you pay the royalty. If you, complicated, but the simplest version is there's the person who wrote the music and the person who wrote the lyrics. If you take off the lyrics and the person who wrote the music has the right to it, they have to grant you the right to use it. And once you have the right to use it, then you pay royalties to that person. That law has changed a lot over the years, but at this moment it was really strict and it was very difficult. As he became more famous, it was easier for him to get the rights because people wanted him to focus on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going back to my preteen memories of my parents. I remember in the 50s the songs of Mickey Katz. Now, you mentioned his name along with other comedians, but the other comedians didn't sing as Mickey Katz did. And then when Alan Sherman came on a few years later, I always felt that Alan Sherman perhaps got his inspiration from Mickey Katz's songs.
I think that's very true. He's saying that Mickey Katz, if you remember, sang in that very heavy Jewish accent. And I think that was part of the difference. There's no question that the Mickey Katz is a huge figure in terms of the transition from the vaudeville songs to the Alan Sherman songs. No question about that. Thank you for that. Other questions? Yeah.
Has anyone ever written a song about Chautauqua?
Bell Tower.
Regarding Hello Mother, Hello Father?
You mean a parody song about you?
Yeah, maybe.
What a great idea, Michael. Thank you so much. I will have to start working on that as soon as possible. Perhaps I get Sally's comedy show.
Do it.
I think we'll do that another time. Well, thank you.
Anybody else?
No, what he's talking about is I've done a song that I sing around campus every once in a while where it goes, the bells of Chautauqua are slightly off key. The bells of Chautauqua sound funny to me. Question?
Yeah, so were all of those albums live? Did he do any studio albums?
Live-ish. He would always do them in front of a small gathering of friends because he wanted to have the laughs on the album. Yes, some of the later stuff is done in studio, and it's missing that. He didn't fake it. They didn't add laughter afterwards. But yeah, there is some studio stuff on the later. I think on My Name Is Alan and some of the later ones. But all of these early albums, he always did it in a room of a crowd about this big, a little bit bigger than this. But there'd always be friends, and there'd always be a lot of alcohol around to make sure everybody was loosened up. Yeah.
Did he die a rich man?
No, he was a gambler. He was an idiot when it came to money. Even after the first album came out, they were he was living beyond his means because in LA you had to keep up a front. So he did okay, but it was up and down. But a lot of the time when he had money, it went on wine, women, and unfortunately not the songs. And somebody in the back.
I'm just wondering where his wife was in all this. Did he stay married until his death?
So Dee was a saint. They did break up at one point. She does divorce at one point. But for most of this period, she's living kind of the life of a single mom. Because he's always on the road, or he's off gambling, or he's off with other women, or he's finding excuses not to be home. He was not a present father. She marries again later on. In his autobiography, he dedicates it to her, and they did have a very loving relationship, and she always loved him to the end. How could you not? I mean, he's an incredibly lovable, charismatic guy. But no, she bore the brunt of this for a long, long time, and I forget what year they get divorced, but she marries again.
You said he had children? Where are they now?
They're both, I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, when I read the biography that I told you about, they were still alive. I forgot to see if they still are, but as of, what was everything, probably about 10 years ago. Again, they have, very mixed feelings. I mean, they love their father, they love the legacy of it. They were very honest about how not present he was, and how difficult it is to be the child of somebody who's so self-centered and so childish. And, so it was difficult for them, but they loved him. Again, how could you not?
You talked a little bit about how he influenced your view of yourself. How did it influence your career?
How did Alan Sherman influence my career? I always wanted to be Alan Sherman, and that's all I ever wanted to do. I never made a career of it, although I will say I haven't even made this connection until you asked me that. I just finished writing a children's book with, a couple years ago I wrote a book with Steve Sciarippa, one of the actors of The Sopranos, and he just approached me to write a children's book in verse, in Dr. Seuss verse. And I've been writing in verse, writing parody songs in verse my whole life. This is the first time I'm getting paid for it. No, I had 2 cover stories at USA Today written in verse. One was on Humphrey the Whale, and the other was a parody of Casey at the Bat. I don't know what you're talking about tomorrow, actually. But I've always written trying to find the oddest and funniest rhymes I could find. And it never occurred to me, this is where it came from, absolutely. Oh my God, revelation, real time. Hey, speaking of real time, haven't got it here. Where'd it go? Oh, in real time, if you're talking about another Jewish singer who's not quite as funny, I am doing the Leonard Cohen course next week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2:30 in Hultquist. Any other questions? Or
When is your Casey at the Bat?
what? Casey the Bat's tomorrow at 4:30 in Turner. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much for coming.
To be the introducer today.
Oh,
did
what
you know
happened?
about that?
No, I did not know about that. I'm sorry. I mean, I saw your name when we first did the books like 2 weeks ago, but I haven't.
And it was 3:30.
Well, that's for the movie. Yes, that's still happening.
No, but today.
Yeah.
Oh, you think I'm on at 3:30?
If you wish to be.
Because all I have is a script about
for him?
Yeah,
Oh.
to introduce.
Okay.
And then it must be somebody else because I think
I left my notes at home, so I don't have that.
oh, well. Then she got me 25 hours. And I think
Okay.
my next gig is not till August.